All right. So we did our presentation on the Jim Crow laws. My name is Emily.
I'm Courtney.
And I'm Brooke.
And Claire's not with us right now, but she helped us on this presentation. So the learning objectives for this presentation, the things that you're going to learn are the background information on the Jim Crow laws, what the Jim Crow movement was, which musicians migrated to get away from the Jim Crow laws and where they went, the impact that it had on the musicians, the impact that it had on the music, and we're going to talk about if race was addressed in the music.
Just starting for the background information, what were the Jim Crow laws? They were laws enacted by southern states that legalized segregation between the blacks and whites, and soon enough these laws became a lifestyle. Who was Jim Crow? He was a clumsy fictional character in a set of minstrel routines in the 1830s, played by Thomas Dartmouth.
So it wasn't an actual person, it was just a character.
For more background information, they were when they were initiated and what was the purpose. The Jim Crow laws were state and local laws enforcing racial segregation in the South. The laws continued to be in action until 1965. They mandated racial segregation in all public facilities and states of the former Confederate States of America, starting in 1890 with a separate but equal status for African Americans. And the states that they were enforced in were mainly in the South, including but not limited to Alabama, Louisiana, Georgia, Kentucky, and Mississippi.
So some of the laws that they had were obviously worse than others, but a lot of them were pretty equal. For example, one of the harsher laws was in Kentucky, and it was passed in 1866, and it was for miscegenation. So it says, this law prohibited whites from marrying any African American who was more than 12% African American, meaning having a blood relation up to the third generation to the African American. So the penalty for not following this law was a felony that was punishable by imprisonment in the state jail for up to 5 years. And then one of the more lenient laws was passed in Tennessee in 1955, and that was on employment, and that was just that separate washrooms in mines were required. So there's a different spectrum of laws and how harsh they were.
Who were the jazz musicians who migrated north to get away from the Jim Crow laws? And it was Louis Armstrong, Jelly Roll Morton, and Joe Oliver. What awaited them in their new cities was more issues supporting segregation were in Chicago, such as the hotels they played at were only for whites so that they couldn't stay the night there after they would perform, and the blacks would be fined higher for things such as taxi cabs and etc. In LA, similar issues had occurred. Laws were put into place regarding marriage, segregation, and separate places for entertainment. According to this article, LA's ugly Jim Crow history, when beaches were segregated, the city's black population was about 300 out of 15,300. The beaches were not lawfully segregated, however, it was still present.
The social impact of the migration was pretty big, and these people lived the conditions that these people lived in, they settled in communities with people of the same race, and a lot of them found job opportunities. And the musicians mostly strived in their new surroundings, for the exception of Joe Oliver. Louis made more than 60 records that changed jazz history. He performed nightly with the Hot 5 and Hot 7, as well as playing for cafes. But Louis Armstrong also dealt with some struggles, such as critics, because they gave him really harsh reviews that were very racist. And Jelly Roll Morton left home as a teenager and toured the country as a musician. He also led a band, the Red Hot Peppers, which then later earned fame for their hits. And like I said, Joe Oliver, he found connections in Chicago with his peers from New Orleans, and he became the lead in a band that played at many clubs, and he was successful for a while, but then he had a downfall when he was diagnosed with inflammatory diseases.
So when we're talking about addressing the issue of race, multiple artists addressed the issues of race throughout the Jim Crow law time period, and they acted as advocates for these movements, leading to making history. Louis Armstrong recorded, "What did I do to be so black and blue?" Sorry. The lyrics included, "My only sin is in my skin. What did I do to be so black and blue?" In response to rising turmoil over segregation, Louis also canceled the tour in the Soviet Union and made a public statement saying, "The way they were treating my people in the South, the government can go to hell." Benny Goodman was the first to hire a black musician to be a part of his ensemble, which helped push for racial integration in the jazz community. Not only was this taboo, but it was illegal in many states. So basically for this, the artists moved, but they also kept in mind the Jim Crow laws and why they moved, and they put that into their music.
Impact on musicians and music. African Americans were encouraged to stay in the South during this time because it gave them more opportunities. There was still segregation, but their audience was a mixed crowd. Black men and women would sit higher up in the balconies, while white men and women would sit near the stage. The Jim Crow laws greatly affected the creation of jazz. Because of them, it closed professions for the black community. And since music was so important to them, it was really hard for them to express their feelings toward these laws and unfairness that they went through.
So just to summarize, the Jim Crow laws were racist laws that were made to segregate whites and blacks. Jim Crow is not a real person. He was a character made by white people. Jim Crow laws originated in the South, where there was slavery. Not all laws were equal. Different states held different laws. Musicians left the South to get away from the Jim Crow laws and write music about their situations, but the segregation was everywhere. Musicians went to big cities to write their music, and they clumped together in small communities that were still segregated. Jazz music from black artists started to appeal to white people, and some of the music created had racial content in it to show their struggles.
And then we just have our works cited, and that's the rest of our presentation.